Good evening, everyone. Tonight is the Town Council special meeting. Tonight will be the town manager along with the superintendent of schools will both present their proposed budgets of the town council to outline the budget drivers. So first up, we will have Carl present the proposed budget on the town side, and then Mary Ann will do her proposed budget for the education. So, Carl?
Tonight, at least on my side, is to give you an overview of the big budget picture, as well as the town side, capital, and debt. And then the superintendent will speak to the Board of Ed side of it. So there is going to be some Board of Ed stuff in my presentation, but you'll get a little bit more of a view of that when the superintendent goes over her side of it. So just so that we're clear on what we're talking about, the budget is more than just numbers. I know there's an intensity to look at that and talk about percentages and the like, but it's really trying to find a way that articulates the priorities that the council wants to pursue, that the town needs to address, and work through competing needs. There is going to be competition in this process. So that's an important point to remember when you're looking at deciding what's the best path forward for the town's financial plan. You also have to make sure that we're responding to the pressures that are both outside of Clinton. There's general macroeconomic issues that drive how we do business, as well as internal pressures that the town has, which are things more of our control. So the budget process sets priorities, and the council will be setting priorities while you're setting dollar amounts. There are scarce resources, that would be tax dollars, monies that come from Hartford, and then permit fees and the like. Scarce resources implies that there's competition. Competition means that there is choice. So you will be making a series of choices as you move forward in this budget process. And so you can cheat. The proposed budget offers one set of priorities, one set of choices for your consideration as we go forward over the workshops. It also contains the best information available at this time. We are early in the year for putting together budget numbers. Budget numbers normally get tighter and improved, particularly information we're looking for from the outside, as we go through the review process and leading up to the public hearings. So you'll recall the last two budgets, there were opportunities to make budget amendments as we went on because insurance numbers came in or were more refined than early estimates. So you've got the best information available in the binder with you right now, but there are things in there that are in a state of flux. So high level, total budget expenditures are proposed to increase by 2.28%. That's all expenditures, town, Board of Ed, debt, and capital. The tax rate needed to support the proposed budget would increase by less than 1%, or a 0.91% tax increase. The difference between why expenditures is up one rate and the tax rate is up a different rate is primarily due to growth in the grand list and continued appropriation from fund balance to support capital projects. It helps fill the gap and explains why you don't have a one-for-one where the budget expenditures are up and the tax rate would be up the same amount. This has been a pattern we've been following for the past three budgets now. There is a fundamental disconnect between expenditures and the tax rate. The proposed budget at some more granular detail. So the town operating budget would be going from $16.6 million up to $17.3, $736,000 increase or 4.4%. The Board of Ed's operating was going from 33.9 to 34.5, or a 1.89% increase. Debt service, I know there's a tendency to want to granularize it, so the town side is up by 170, the Board of Ed side is down by 245,000. Net, there is a reduction in debt service compared to last year, and that's probably the more important story because the taxpayer is paying for it regardless of whether it's town or Board of Ed. We've been able to take advantages of refunding opportunities when we've gone out to place debt, which have given us the ability to call different maturities. And that gives us the net reduction. But when you're calling different maturities for different projects, that's how we get some swing between, if you remember last year, the Board of Ed's debt increased and the town's decreased. This year, it's now the reverse of it. We're pulling different maturities, different years, which then has an impact in terms of the total debt cost going down, but individual years are going to fluctuate a little bit. Capital improvements, the town is going down from 2.7 to 2.5. The Board of Ed is increasing from 99,000 to 346. So from a percentages standpoint, it's large, but they're going from a relatively small base. So you have a total overall budget of $58.4 million, going up to $59.8, which is the $1.3 million increase, which gets you to the 2.28% growth in overall expenditures. On the revenue side, the grand list grew by over 3%. Just as a point of caution, we are starting the revenue discussion before the Board of Assessment Appeals hearings. Their hearings take place by statute in March. So for the purposes of the discussion, to help you focus on a budget and to focus on where taxes are going, I've made a discount to the grand list, which hopefully is more conservative than where the Board of Assessment Appeals comes out, and then we can make an adjustment after the board is done, and the town and the council can adjust the revenue side of the budget. Growth in the grand list generates over $1.45 million in additional revenue, assuming the current mill rate, which is 29.83 mils. So that's part of that that disconnect between the amount of increase in expenditures and the smaller increase in tax rate. The other large chunk of revenue that comes into the town side of the budget is state aid. State aid is normally used to limit property tax increases. There are specific programs that come from the state driven by formula. The governor dropped his budget this morning. So some of the assumptions we made when we built this budget were mirrored in what we saw coming out of the governor today. So the biggest source of revenue we get out of the state is education cost sharing. That is level funded from where it was last year, which was the first year of the biennium. If you recall last year's discussion, we were projecting a reduction in ECS because that's where the formula was going. The governor made a decision to increase funding to hold everyone harmless given where we were in the pandemic. So that was a 2-year window to maintain ECS, which is a rather significant chunk of cash to the town. Maintaining ECS at this current level certainly aids us. There was some talk amongst some leadership of the House and the Senate that maybe they'll take another look at it in the budget process, considering the financial situation the state is in, that maybe they wouldn't have to go back or that they could hold towns harmless. Prefer to wait and see what we get rather than speculate. Other aid has been assumed to be level funded. The governor's numbers that came out are almost level funded. So there's a $2,300 dip that it's not earth-shattering to the budget, but I'll give you a path to correct that when we go over the revenue side of the budget. The governor did propose a cap on the mill rate that you could charge for a motor vehicle. It was 45 mils, which is not an issue for us. We don't have a tax rate that high. He's proposing to knock it down to 29 mils. So everybody's automobile car tax bill will be based on 29 mils, not on whatever the mill rate is in the community. There's supposed to be offset in state aid, which is supposed to keep municipalities whole. The number that was included in what the governor put out today is right, assuming last year's mill rate, or this fiscal year's mill rate of 29.83. So if we land where this budget comes in, there's going to be a disconnect between what the state would be providing for offsetting revenue. So that does cause a little bit of concern, and it becomes a matter to monitor as the budget is debated up in Hartford. Fund balance has been used in the budget. Again, traditionally it's used to provide a degree of tax relief. There's 2 forms in which we've used the fund balance in order to control where taxes go. First is appropriated fund balance. This budget assumes that we're going to use $250,000 of that. We used $350,000 last year, taking it up for a one-time adjustment to respond to implementing revaluation. So this year takes it back down to where it's traditionally been. And then there's applied fund balance, which we're using for capital improvement projects. So there I'm proposing to use 1.345 of fund balance in order to address capital needs. Growth in the fund balance has created this opportunity. When we went over the financial forecast with the council before the November election, the consensus of the group was to slowly take down the fund balance over time, not spend it all very quickly, in order to have an ability to come down to where our policy max is, but also to have the ability to use those dollars over as long a time horizon as possible to get the best tax benefit to the taxpayers of Clinton. Other revenue is more locally sourced revenue. If you remember the financial forecast, locally sourced revenue is not something that's a major driver of our budget. It's not, changes in that aren't as sensitive or aren't as dire as they are to a change in state aid. But it's all important towards trying to control the tax rate. There's new revenue sources, so the fire marshal fee ordinance that the council previously passed, this budget now reflects that there's going to be additional revenue coming in for plan reviews done by the fire marshal. We're also transferring in revenue that has been generated by the shellfish, sale of shellfish licenses. That has gone off into a separate account. This budget proposes to move some of that revenue into the general fund, which helps pay for the seed stock that the Shellfish Commission is putting into Clinton Harbor. So instead of the taxpayers paying for all of it, we're using some money generated from those people that shellfish to help pay for it. We're seeing increases in activity for permits and fees. Real estate conveyance is another activity that is up higher. So the overall increase in local revenue over last year is about a 17% jump, which is equal to about $1/10 million. Town government expenditures. So the town government is, as I noted earlier, is proposed to be funded at $17.3 million, an increase of $736,000. For your reference, so that you know what's gone into it, at least on the town side of the ledger, between operating and capital, I've already cut $653,000 out of what you have for you tonight. So there has been some work that's gone into this budget at the department head level and then at my level. Things that are influencing the budget that you need to be aware of, there's a projected increase in our solid waste tip fee for the garbage that gets transported out of Clinton. Pandemic and inflation uncertainty, we're seeing instances where vendors can't give us any kind of forecast for pricing because it's whatever the market will bear at this point. So we are seeing and exposed to a risk for inflation in different areas of our budget. Insurance increases right now are projected high in certain lines of coverage. The market is hardening, so that's giving us not as many opportunities to shop our insurance around. Certain lines like cyber insurance are, because cyber attacks are growing in popularity, cyber insurance is increasing its cost. So those are all costs that come down to us for operating expense for how we respond to that from a risk management standpoint, as well as making sure that we have coverage. And then the budget also includes the addition of a town planner as a full-time position. That was also the consensus of the council when we did the financial forecasting process. There was a desire to see that position brought back into the budget and moved from our delivery system, which is a part-time consultant planner, to a full-time position. So we've got somebody here more than the 1 day a week and on call. Putting the town expenditures into cost centers is another way of trying to look at the budget. So I've put the budget into government administration, land use and development, protection and emergency, which is our public safety response, public works and facilities, recreation, the library, and insurance and benefits. So you'll see that large spike, at least from a percentage standpoint, on land use, which is attributable to chiefly including that town planner position back into the budget. On the capital improvement side, this chart shows you kind of the history of what we've been doing from a capital funding standpoint. So the blue bars in the out years are what was run through the budget. It does not include separate appropriations that were done with fund balance to fund other capital projects. Since 2021, we've been including fund balance in the budget to make it a little bit more of an honest snapshot of our expenditures. So the capital projects are funded, and with the blue bar, you can see the total, and the green bar shows you the dollars that have been used from fund balance in order to fund aspects of the capital plan. So capital funding is necessary for funding critical investments to the town, trying to address and get ahead of deferred maintenance, which has been left behind in a number of areas. Some of the major projects, the radio replacement project that involves police, fire, EMS, and public works is back in again for additional funding. That is a very large project. So this is an attempt to try and do aspects of it on a pay-as-you-go basis rather than doing capital bonding for it. We're continuing the practice of building replacement reserves for the fire apparatus of the fire department, continuing funding for paving rather than bonding that. As I've noted in the past, after you've paid off your bond over 20 years for a paving project, you got to go back and pave the road again. So in terms of efficiency of money, it's probably a little bit better to do it on a pay-as-you-go basis. Debt service. So the debt service amount includes all bonds that have been issued for the town and Board of Ed projects. It also includes capital leases, where we've been doing lease purchasing. This budget moves us further away from the lease purchasing as a model, at least for short-term vehicle purchases, which would be police cruisers. We still have some legacy leases in there for public works, which will carry with us from now until 2029 is the last capital lease. But you can see that over the past few years, we've been able to position ourselves to shave off the top of our debt peak. And now we're starting to get to, although it's kind of hard to see on this chart, we are at a point where we are lower than where we were in 2021. So now amortization of our debt is starting to dip, which gives us future financial flexibility as we continue to work through our existing debt. And then net between the town and the Board of Ed position, there is an overall reduction in debt service compared to last year. Comparing the budget, comparing the adopted expenditures for the fiscal year we're in at present to what's proposed ahead of you, the slices of the pie don't change too significantly. Education is still 58% of the budget. Debt service is going from 9 to 8%. Capital improvement is in at a solid 5%. And then town government is up from 28 to 29. So the pie slices are roughly where we were historically. On the revenue side, the overall theme of the slices of the pie aren't different. There's some movement between them based on how this budget is being positioned compared to where the last one was. So if you remember the chart on capital, we were using an awful lot of fund balance for capital. It was over 2.2 million. This budget scales that back. So you'll see the applied fund balance is now reduced as a percent of the overall revenue mix, going from about 4.5% to 2.6%. State aid is about the same. That locally generated revenue is going from 2.3 to 2.6%. So again, it's still that smaller slice of the pie. And as always, the largest piece of revenue is the local property tax. I guess the governor's mill rate cap would change the state aid tax dynamic for however long that program can exist and be funded. The proposed mill rate going into this budget, this would look at a mill rate of 30.10 mils. So it's an increase of about a quarter mil or 0.9% over the current fiscal year. That's lower than the 31.25 that we had in 1920 and 2021. And those of you that have been here will remember when we did the 2021 budget, we were able to do that at a zero tax increase. So we kind of held the line, and then we're able to reduce the mill rate through revaluation. So a little bit of that history so that you can have an appreciation for where we've been. You can see that where the mill rate has gone in the last three budgets, we've been able to keep the rate of taxation trimmed to what could be more acceptable levels than where it's been in the past. The distribution of those mills into the individual budget centers, roughly 1 mil goes towards government administration, a quarter of a mil toward land use, 2 mils to public safety, 1.5 or 1 2/3 mils for public works, 1/3 of a mil for recreation and human services, 4/10 of a mil for the library, almost 4 mils for debt service and capital improvements. Insurance and other costs are in at a little less than 3 mils, and then the education millage is over 17 mils. So as you would expect, being the larger part of the budget, it's also the larger part of the mill rate distribution. What does the mill rate mean to the average taxpayer? So we have an average market value of homes in Clinton, depending on architectural styles. So in this particular case, I'm using a home that comes in at $312,000 for its market value. The assessment is 70% of that. So that individual's tax bill under the current mill rate comes in at $6,500 or $6,514.87. Under the proposed tax rate with the budget you had before you, there's a slight increase of $58, $59 from where they were in the current with their current tax bill. The value of a mill comes off of the grand list. So for the purposes of this discussion, 1 mill is $1,700,212. When you're looking at cutting, growth in the grand list is great, but it keeps moving the goalpost further out for what you have to do to amend the budget in order to have an impact on the mill rate, which is the ultimate cost that the taxpayer has to carry. What I've said over the past 2 budgets is that you really need to be mindful of the value of a mill and the dollar amount threshold necessary to impact the rate of taxation. If you're not cutting in an increment that impacts the mill rate, you're cutting for no real purpose at all because you're not delivering any type of tax relief to a resident. So to impact the mill rate, you're looking at reductions equal to $17,002. That reduces the mill rate by 1/100th of a mil. That's the minimum increment to benefit a taxpayer or to amend the mill rate. For reference, that 1/100th of a mil results in $2.18 of tax relief. So if you feel you're under pressure to deliver significant tax relief, you can figure out the math yourself for how much more you're going to have to do in order to impact the mill rate, and then come up with a commensurate number of dollar amount in cuts that delivers that to you in those increments of $17,000. How the average tax bill is spent. Out of that $6,500 tax bill, $224 is spent on government administration. A little less than $62 is spent on land use and development. $465 is spent for public safety response with police and fire and EMS. Public works is $353. Access to recreation and human services and youth and family services comes in at about $75. Library is $90 a year. Repaying debt and capital projects is $871. Non-departmental expense, which is sort of the insurance costs, which deliver the upper expenditures, comes in at $635. And then education is in at almost $3,800 of the tax bill. So before I hand it over to the superintendent, a couple of things for you to be mindful of. I like to make sure that we're putting together a good budget and an honest budget. I've given you an honest budget at this point. The budget is a primary policy tool of the town council. The budget is an opportunity to set priorities and a direction for the town. You're setting service levels. You're delivering what the public is expecting or not expecting. So there's an awful lot that goes into a budget. It's not just a matter of wearing a hat and representing one constituency, one type of expenditure. You have to look at this across what's good for the entire community, not one department or one cost center over another. Difficult decisions went into putting this budget together, trying to come in with numbers that were reasonable and responsible. That's how I've looked at it. I've spoken to the superintendent. I think she's trying to come in with a reasonable budget. So a lot of work went in on the front end, prepping this for you, but there's going to be a lot of decisions, difficult decisions that the council's going to have to work through as we walk through the workshop process, the public hearing, and all of the rest as we lead up to a town vote on the budget again, to have a fair budget, an honest budget, and a fair tax rate to fund that budget. So with that, I will now turn it over to the superintendent for her overview of the Board of Ed budget. We will swap computers.
I'm going to turn it over to Jack Sherbin, who is the chair of the Budget and Finance Subcommittee.
I'd like to read this. This is from Erica Galvin, who apologizes for not being here tonight. She had another commitment. So this is a quick statement from the board. The Board of Education budget presented to you this evening is the result of several weeks of work, beginning with the direction given by the Town Council in September and culminating with the unanimous approval of the proposed budget we unanimously approved on a Monday. In developing and passing this budget, the board has fulfilled its charge thoughtfully and responsibly. The members, particularly those serving on the Budget and Finance Subcommittee, are commended for the diligence in this process as they thoroughly reviewed budget requests, questioned how the requests supported the district's strategic priorities, and made decisions that are reflected in this budget in the coming years. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here tonight alongside Carl in presenting our Board of Education budget. And as always, brevity is on my mind. Many of you who know me know that this is our budget represents a lot of work and effort. And although I will try to be brief, there's a lot of information. And tonight is really just that chance to kick off for all of you. I will provide some context tonight, that I think will help as you dig into the numbers. So I'm trying to give that higher level kind of summary of questions that I think you may have and some of the driving forces of our budget and the things that are influencing our numbers. So that's the intent of this. Within your budget books, there is a copy of the presentation for you. And so I think even going forward in the next couple of weeks, that presentation hopefully will be a good reference point to give you some of the key things that are driving the budget. But there's also plenty of information within this budget book. And at the very end of the presentation, I'll take a minute and show you what's in each of those tabs so that you have a quick ready reference. And again, we put this budget together, the budget book. Each year we enhance it a little bit to try to provide answers and information to the questions that we know that the community members may have, and in particular the town council. As Jack stated in his statement from Erica, this budget started in September as the town council met, and we were here to kind of listen to that conversation, and then all the way through Monday night when the Board of Ed approved it. So there's a lot that went into it on our end, and now we present it to you and turn it over to all of you for your consideration and for this process. So I will be back on the 24th, I believe it is. This is a workshop to answer questions. So you have a couple weeks with this information. And again, I hope tonight I can highlight a little bit of the context of what went into making decisions about this budget and then where we landed. So with that, I'll jump in. As we always start, the district has 5 strategic priorities, and we have a mission statement that I think is pretty powerful. It's been in place, and it guides the work that we're doing and the decisions we make. So in Clinton, we are striving to empower our learners to embrace and influence the future with courage and compassion. And the 5 priorities that you see here on this slide are the areas within which we build goals, and we use these to help make decisions. And you can see the first 2 are really around our student experience in academics and learning experiences. Priority 3 is around the school communities, the well-being, mental health, and building strong learning environments with our students and staff. Priority 4 is engaging our stakeholders in our community to ensure that we're all on that same page about the work we're doing and the decisions we're making. Sorry, yep, no problem. And then priority 5 really is the one when we sit down to do budget, we're looking at these other 4, in particular 1 through 3, but it's priority 5, I think, that governs and guides the work that I do, the central office does, and the board does to make sure that our dollars are well spent, that what is invested by this community into our school system is accounted for and really does support the student learning and the goals and priorities we have. So I like to include this. I know this becomes a public document, and I alluded to this, that our budget process really does start as soon as we open our school year. And we're budgeting for the next school year and trying to make decisions. So in September, I think it was the end of September, the town council, it had an initial kind of budget meeting or workshop that I thought was helpful to us. Erica Gelvin, myself, Carolyn Dickey were there, and we heard loud and clear that the town council was looking for lean budgets, that they wanted thoughtful decision making, and gave some directive to collaborate Board of Ed and Carl as we move through this process. And I think that was a great opportunity to start early and hear a little bit from the town council about what they were looking for. So that was a new piece this year. In October, we begin our cost center budgets. That's what we call each department and each school that are outlined in this book. And that starts at the building level. Student needs, academic needs, learning opportunities, extension activities are all identified and defined, and budgets are put together by our directors and our school principals working with their staff. Then the budget goes through a series of workshops, just like all of you are going to begin now in the month of February. Those started in December with our Board of Ed. We use our Budget and Finance Subcommittee to do that work. Jack was our chair this year, and it includes the board meeting in particular with myself as we look at our driving forces and some guidelines as we're putting budgets together, presentations from each of the directors and schools to share what their needs are and what their budget requests are at that point. Then the myself and the board work together to really refine those, just as you are doing, to get to a budget that I present at the end of January, and then 2 weeks later, on Monday night, the board approved that budget, and that's what's here for you today. Every budget tells a story, so this is my one slide. You have to indulge me just a little bit. And you know, for us, we began this year with a lot of hope as we talked about recovery from a pandemic year that was disrupted with hybrid learning and not being able to fully have an in-person year. We had at least a little more than half the year were in-person days, but as everybody knows, it was a very, very difficult year. And this year began with hope, with our path towards recovery, and we are on that path. But it's not, we're not moving as fast, and there's a lot of things that happened this year as well with pandemic increases and things that have put pressure on the schools. I said as we went into this year that this is a road that's not going to happen in 1 year, that it's going to be several years for us to address the needs of our students, our staff, and to be back racing down this road. And yet, what we're seeing is really powerful results of rebounding, of growth in academics for our students. Monday night, we presented some midterm internal assessment data and saw that our students are meeting and exceeding growth goals that we have established. So there's a lot of really positive things happening. But I think this is a really good image to show that this is a multi-year piece. And I think this helps to tell the story of the investments from this budget and why the board made some of the decisions they did and included things within this budget. It really is a focus on our students and our staff. So there is no doubt that in Clinton, our staff is our strength. They are talented, they are passionate, and they care deeply about their students. The budget and the things within this budget really support that learning center in that classroom. It is about our students and staff. It's maintaining those learning environments where teachers can work one-on-one with students. We are seeing students at all different points in their learning. And the one-on-one interaction, you have a great picture there of our kindergarten class, is really important. We also have money in this budget to support, obviously, staffing, but also some program implementation, and you'll hear that a little more as we go through. And definitely an investment in our social emotional systems of support. Much of that is supported by grant funding, pandemic relief grant funding, and that's outlined in this booklet, so you'll be able to see that. But we also have operational budget investments as well. And then finally, those enrichment activities of athletics and clubs and the extracurriculars are so critical. They've been much less limited this year. Our kids have been able to participate in after-school activities and in athletics. And this budget definitely continues that because we know how critical that is for their growth, development, and their social emotional well-being. I think the other major theme or story to this budget and to the work of the Board of Ed, and I will say to my commitment since I've been the superintendent in Clinton, is that accountability and looking for ways to contain costs, to make big moves, to adjust what we might have to ask for from taxpayers, and then looking for ways to offset costs. And so this year's budget is influenced in a positive way by being able to leverage grant funding so that we aren't looking for additional operational costs in the areas of staffing or career and tech ed, our early childhood programming, and then some of our special education and special services needs. And then the other piece that we really work hard on is pricing, competitive bidding, pushing our vendors for solid pricing, going elsewhere if we need to, and then looking for areas that we don't need any longer that we can potentially cut or trim or move in another direction. So our total operating budget request, you saw that in Carl's presentation, is 1.89% over last year's request. It's an increase of $641,147. This slide takes that increase, the increase alone, the 641,147, and it kind of breaks out where the increase is going. And you can see that this really is a budget that's supporting staff, students, teaching materials. Our insurance costs are also increasing in the same way, the same pressures that the town has. Professional services is really our nursing contracts and some of the contracts that we have with vendors, as well as services for contracted services for physical therapy, occupational therapy, and needs for our students. And then everything else is in that small kind of teal color. So when you take the entire increase, I thought, it's a little bit helpful here to see our budget is driven by our staff and the people who serve our students. And that is the wealth of our district, and it is where the greatest investment is. So the increase here, 1.08%, is related to salary and benefits. Everything else is in that 0.81%. I'm saying it over and over again, but this slide, and I love this picture, but this slide really emphasizes what the major drivers of our budget are. And so I'm going to outline some of the increases and decreases for us in the major object categories, and you'll see that it is tied to our classroom centers is where the money is. So if we are a staff-driven budget, and I know this is often a question, it's at the top of our object page in our budget book, and it makes up it's just under 80% of our budget are these costs. We're seeing a 1.94% increase in certified salaries. Non-certified salaries is a little higher. That actually represents 2 years of salary increases because of when the contracts were settled. So last year's budget, we flat funded because we didn't have a new contract. That contract was settled after the start of this fiscal year. So it represents this year's increase. We had to, backfill, and then next year. So it looks like a higher increase, but it's actually 2 years worth of increases in the non-certified. And then lastly, employee benefits. We are seeing a slightly higher percent increase in our health insurance benefits. And actually, I'm going to go to the next slide because I have it broken out for you. But you can see overall total salary and benefits is at 1.37%. And again, we've worked hard with this. We have offset some things with grants, and the employee benefit line is really that's the line that's helping to hold our costs down by having a decrease there. So this slide breaks out that employee benefits line for you. These are the components that go into that employee benefits amount. So we look at it on a larger scale of objects, which is a whole bunch of accounts together that are similar. And so within the employee benefits, we have health insurance and benefits, and that's increasing slightly. We do have a lower census, the number of staff members who are participating in our health plan, and so that's offsetting the increase a little bit and is keeping the amount change at a fairly low amount for the health insurance increase. Secondly, disability, Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment is all pretty flat funded at this point. The big difference is in pension non-certified. We've seen really positive gains in the market in our investment for the non-pension account. We had been seeing over $100,000 increase the last couple of years to maintain that account. It's about, I think it was 80% funded when the auditor presented. So we're in solid shape, but as a result of those positive investment gains, our contribution is down almost $100,000 this year. So that's helping to offset any of the increases. And then workers' compensation, we're in a partnership with the town. We've had positive experience trends, and so that's down. So overall, that's how we get to the negative $67,000 in our employee benefits. Again, at that high level of summary, these are some of the areas where we're seeing that are driving our increase. So I mentioned and noted professional services earlier. Those are our evaluations, our PT and OT contracts. And that last one, the right to read curriculum, it's actually right to read legislation that's coming from the state, where they are, in June, they will be providing all districts with a mandated, basically, curriculum elements and requiring districts to employ those. So we will be looking at that. There's about $30,000 in the budget this is for early elementary, to pilot materials and to address that new legislative mandate. We'll be evaluating it next year, so this is the initial request. So of that $49,000, $30,000 of it is linked to that right to read state legislative mandate. Insurance, I think enough said. We are adding reinstating an athletic insurance for $10,000 or $9,000 that we had previously, and it was taken away in budget cuts. And so that's a piece of it, but the majority of it is related to cybersecurity pressures on the insurance renewal. Tuition is always a bit of a challenge. Last year it was down about $100,000. This year it's up just over $100,000, and that varies primarily based on our out-of-district tuition costs, and those are for students with disabilities in general that we cannot provide appropriate education for in district. We have a lot of really quality district programs, but there are some students that require to be educated out of district. And so it is the line item that tends to change, changes during the year. We budget based on what we know and anticipate with the students we have, and we project that to next year, and we're looking at an increase next year in that line. And then the investment in our classrooms, we have some instructional and textbook supplies in a variety of areas that are contributing to a small increase of $35,000. The next slide are decreases. So in addition to the benefits that I talked about, these are some other decreases in the object lines, right? So our utilities, we have some reductions there. We continue to kind of squeeze that line a little bit based on our actuals that we trend throughout the year. Communications, we're always looking to do some online delivery of materials where we can to reduce that postage. And we have a small decrease in telephone, and then again in fuel. So one of our major drivers, when you look at our budget and the objects, you'll see that transportation actually makes up 5% of the overall budget. So it's one of our bigger drivers. We contract with M&J Bus. We go out to bid every 5 years. We're going into the last year of our contract. They've been great partners for us, and where other districts have struggled with drivers and keeping their buses running, our impacts have been much smaller this year. With that said, we have been able, and we've been pushing both with declining enrollment and changes in pandemic, really looking at our routes and the need for buses. And we've been doing this over time, but in the last 2 years, we've been able to reroute and reduce our bus runs. So we're reducing 2 bus runs next year. And then in special ed out of town though, so you can see the decrease of $108,278. But our out-of-town transportation for students who are being educated out of town is going up by about the same amount. So it's an offsetting cost by doing that reduction in our routes, resulting in a net increase of $5,479. So we've been able to contain that driver, which often goes up about 3% every year. I alluded to tuition. Again, our tuition, I should have left that page open. Our tuition line is 4.84% of the overall budget, so it's in that 5%. It's another major driver for us. And we really do a lot of things to contain costs in this area. Our goal is to educate every student in our schools in Clinton. That is our mission. But all students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, and sometimes we can't meet their needs fully in our programs in our schools. We also have a regional collaboration that's mentioned there on the slide right here in town, which is also a really powerful thing, so that commitment to having our students in town. It's a secondary transition program for students who require services beyond the age of 18 and graduation from high school to get them life ready and established post-secondary and with a career. And we actually have what we call our Strive program here on Main Street. Down near the hardware store, there's a building there, and our students, along with students from Guilford and Madison, have an opportunity in that transition program, and they work locally, and they are able to be successful. So that's an example of something that we've really worked on. We also built a program at Morgan this year using grant funding. It's called our Student Support Center, and we have licensed clinicians that work within that program to work with our students. We knew we would see some challenges from pandemic and re-engaging students, and that's been something that's been really successful for us and has helped to contain costs a little bit for some of the outer district needs. And in each of our schools we have those programs. So it is a push-pull, it adjusts, even within the year it adjusts, but it is a larger part of our budget, and we have some detail in the budget book that you can look at a little more closely. So that takes us to our budget book. So I'd like to take a minute, if you'd indulge me, and just let you kind of see what's in this budget book for you, and where you can find some information and answers to questions, and then where you can generate a lot of questions probably as well. Okay? So if you would, the table of contents is right there inside that front cover. The background section has a letter from myself and our board chair, Erica Gelvin, some information about who's who, our mission statement, our goals for this year, and budget calendars. So probably not going to spend a whole lot of time there. The next section, you know, we do really monitor this as a Board of Ed, as an administration, and we make decisions. So we always include our enrollment projections. These are updated annually by NESDEC, who does this work. And so each year we include this in our budget book along with trending. Behind that is some class size information, because those are always questions, and this is data that the board looks at as well when they're making decisions about staffing. And then behind that, starting on page 10, okay, are charts of our staffing. So you can break it out by the different subject areas, by schools. The first several pages are certified staff, and they show trending over time. So from 2017-18 all the way to 22-23 projected. Okay, so if you have questions about staffing and what's happened, you can see that. And then it's followed by non-certified staffing. So we have a whole section on enrollment, staffing, trends. The request by object may be, you know, a place that I would encourage you to spend a little bit of time to see the drivers. I've talked about some of this tonight in my presentation, but on page 17, each object category is described, what makes up that object from all of the different cost centers. This is the macro level look. And then there's a bullet and a descriptor about what's driving either the increase or the decrease in that object. So this is really a great reference if you're looking at our numbers and saying, what the heck, why is this going up 35,000 or why is it dropping? You can come to this page, find the object, and it'll have a little description as to why. Okay? And then on page 21 is that macro level look of the objects and the increases, the percent change, and then the percent total of the budget. That section is followed by the request by cost center. This shows the overall budget at 1.89, the increase, and how this looks from each cost center in each department. So that's page 23. That's kind of a similar look to what Carl provided, where he showed you each department and the numbers. That's what this summary page does on page 23. And then behind it are descriptors, again, of some of the line items within, like the Joel budget, and what might be driving it or what's in it. But you can see every line item, every number that's asked for in the line item, the percent increases, and then the overall. So this is the detail of that budget by school. Okay, and a reference point, if you're not sure what it is, sometimes it's right above in this description where there's some pictures, or you can ask me that question and I can give you the reasons. That's true for each of our cost centers. It starts with Joel, Elliott, Morgan, special services, central office, maintenance, district-wide. I think I missed special ed in there. Special ed is in there. And then lastly, athletics. So that's that section, and that's the detail of the budget if you really want to dig deep. And then behind that is a section of often frequently asked questions, I think. So we've created pages for those questions that have come up over the years and that I know are pertinent to you as a town council. It helps our board be informed. It helps us explain some of the things in our budget. And it also answers a lot of questions that come up. So there's a page on the tuition and the programs that our out-of-district students are going to. There's a page on grant and revenue, so I don't spend a lot of time on that here. Some of that's town revenue, some of it is directly to the schools, but we describe each of the grants that we've gotten. We show what we've received, and then there's a breakdown of what types of positions or programs are supported by those grants. So it influences the operating budget. It's not totally in your purview, but it's good information and it helps answer questions. We have some info on our per pupil, our capital expenditure, the Board of Ed debt, which Carl talks about. So we try to give you that comprehensive look for information and answers. And all of these pieces are things that the board looks at over the last several months, and then we try to put it together so that we can communicate out to all of you and give you the tools that you need, and for the community as well. So with that, I hope I've kind of given that overview. I know you're going to take some time, and we'll have some time on the 24th to really answer questions and talk about this budget. You can reach out to me ahead of time. Feel free to email me with anything that you have or anything you'd like me to prepare for that night that you want to dig into, and I'll be happy to get it to you ahead of time, if I can. Usually I can. Okay? I really appreciate my board, my administrators, my staff, and everybody who contributes to this and the work that we do. It's powerful. It's been hard, but I think we've done really well, and our students they're flourishing again. And we're going to make sure that that keeps happening and that we move in the right direction. So I know this is a difficult time and process for all of you, and we're here to support you in a common vision, I guess. And Carl, I think, lays that out well. So thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you on the 24th.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you.
All right, so we are good. All right, so we're all set. So thank you to Carl and Mary Ann for the presentations. Everybody has their stuff, just review it. And everybody has their schedule of budget workshops that'll be coming up. So obviously we'll be tackling all that coming up. So again, thank you everyone.
She has a